Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies. I'm very excited to have a guest here with me today, Professor Hein de Haas, who's a professor here at Maastricht University and the United Nations University Merit, as well as at UVA in Amsterdam. So Hein, one of the big things you are regularly talking about is the myth that development will cause migration to cease to exist. And I think this is something that obviously a lot of migration scholars know is a myth, but a lot of the general public, and in some cases also policymakers and development practitioners, still have the wrong idea about this. So can you tell us a bit about what's the most misunderstood and why it seems to be so misunderstood?
Well, it goes to the heart of many contemporary misunderstandings in migration. I mean, fortunately, this insight is gaining ground in the research world and to some extent in the policy work, but it's a very, very persistent myth still. I think it's based on a fundamental wrong way of thinking about migration. Largely still as a problem to be solved or a sign of development failure. And that's not the way we talk about other issues of society. We don't talk about the economy or markets or, let's say, marriage in terms of how to solve the issue. The issue is we need to understand it. So because migration is often seen as a problem we need to solve, people think about quick fix solutions. And that is not based on a real understanding of migration. First of all, people have always moved. But more importantly, we have a lot of historical evidence, and there are scholars like Wilbur Zielinski already back in the 1970s have argued that in general, if we look historically in Europe, in America and in the rest of the world, development, modernization, industrialization goes along with more movement initially. And it goes straight against the idea that, for instance, which you often hear now in the policy domain, that the only way to stop South-North migration is to help countries to become richer, to develop, particularly applied to the poorest countries in the world, like in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. The problem is that we have a lot of theoretical and empirical evidence that proves exactly the contrary. That when countries start to industrialize, start to modernize, start to develop infrastructure, the population gain access to information, to education, it leads to more migration, both within borders, that means urbanization, people moving from villages to towns, from towns to big cities, and increasingly that will spill over international borders. So initially, for the first few generations at least, this process leads to more migration, a massive expansion of mobilities of people. And that is it's not a coincidence that the most important emigration countries in the world, particularly countries that have a lot of migration to rich countries, are not the poorest countries in the world, but generally the middle income countries. So we talk about recent history, we talk about countries like Mexico, Morocco, Turkey, the Philippines are not amongst the poorest countries in the world. They're exactly in that middle point. So we see more a sort of non-linear pattern where initially, and this is not a short-term phenomenon, this is a generational phenomenon, countries produce more immigrants, only of course at the point when countries shift into a category of higher income countries, then of course immigration will decrease, as has happened recently, over recent decades, in many countries of the world, like in Southern Europe, or if you look in South Korea. And right now, immigration from Mexico and Turkey is decreasing rapidly because those countries are becoming increasingly wealthy, the population growth is slowing down, so beyond that point you can find a slowing down. So applying that insight, for instance, to the poorest country in the world, like in sub-Saharan Africa, any form of development, whether economically, infrastructurally, socially, education-wise, in all likelihood will lead to more people migrating. And that goes exactly against the intuition of many policy proposals.
Yeah, and as you explained, the migration rate will at least decrease after some kind of tipping point of maybe middle income status. But what's also interesting to note is that still there's migration from high income countries, right? So like myself, I'm an American living in the Netherlands. If poverty was the reason for migration, or if all you had to do was develop a country to make people stop migrating, I wouldn't be living in the Netherlands. You yourself, so you're Dutch originally, but you've also lived in other countries. You lived in the UK for quite some time. And if that were the case, if it was only about development stopping migration, then neither of us would have ever been migrants.
No, and the point is, and why, maybe I just described the pattern like you're describing. So when countries become wealthier, you see more migration. At some point, indeed, countries tend to become net immigration countries, so beyond a certain point they start to attract more migrants than they actually send away. So a country like Mexico may well become a net immigration country. Turkey has been already a net immigration country for the last decade or more even. So that's a process you've historically seen also in Southern Europe, in South Korea, and many other countries in the world. The real reason, I think, and that is where the research becomes important, this pattern has been described in the past. I've tried to test it in 2010 for contemporary migration, and it shows that exactly on the global scale you find the same pattern. And other scholars have replicated that with newer data, and time and again we find the same pattern. So this is pretty, I would say, solid evidence. There are of course variations, and we can have a long debate on that, but the basic pattern is there. The key issue is the explanation, and this is where research is so important. And to cut a very long story short, because we could write a book about this, and that's what we've done, but to cut a very long story short, is that development, so whether it's economically or in terms of infrastructure or in terms of increasing education, leads to increases in aspirations and capabilities to migrate. The aspiration or the capabilities is in a way the most clear-cut case. To migrate, certainly over long distances, you need resources. You need money, you often need degrees, which gives you access to jobs and visas, and you need social context, social capital. People who are a bit better off often have those resources, so they can and are able to migrate. So extreme poverty disables people from moving out, even if they want so. With aspirations, it is like education typically leads people to change their ideas of what a good life is about. Most typically from a rural type of lifestyle to an urban lifestyle. So even irrespective from economic factors, which obviously play a big role, if people get better education, the jobs they often want are in cities or are abroad, but also in terms of their lifestyles. People generally don't want to live in rural areas anymore once they went to school. They look for jobs and lifestyles elsewhere, often in cities, in some cases internationally. So development increases initially capabilities and aspirations to move, and that is the most basic explanation so we can understand this phenomenon.
Thank you so much for giving our viewers a bit of a taste of understanding better the relationship between migration and development. I will put in the description of this video links to additional work of Hein's, also to a blog he's written recently about this, and to also some work of other scholars who specifically worked on this relationship between migration and development. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel, and visit us for more with Hein. Thanks.